Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Southern U Podcast. We try to educate Southern landowners on all things land related. We cover things from timber and agriculture all the way out to hunting and recreational type stuff as well. My name is Taylor McMurtry, and I'm always joined here by the man, the myth, the AL Deer legend himself, Mr. Matt Brock of Habitat First Properties. Uh, and he's not even going to say anything to let us
That
know that
brings
he's
so
here.
much joy to my heart. Just seeing
Yes,
him
but he's
smile when he
he's
hears it.
he's here. And Mr. Jeremy Ferguson of Wildlife Consulting Services and Tut Land Company. And we actually are joined by a very special guest. We have Mr. Albert Tomechko from Vitalize Seed. He's co-owner there, and also we certainly appreciate Vitalize helping us out here on the podcast. They are one of the very few companies that we reached out to, and they said, "Hey, we'll take a chance on you. You know, we believe in what you guys are wanting to do." So, Al, welcome, man. Thank you for taking some time to hang out with us.
Oh, thank you guys. Yeah, I've been following you guys since you started, and I catch as many podcasts as I can. I really enjoy, what you guys bring to the table and your Instagrams and social media and stuff. So it's really an honor to be on. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys will have to bear with us. This is the first episode that we've done completely remote. We usually are we really try hard to um, be in the same room, try to do this thing in person, but um, due to just work business stuff going on and the fact that I've got COVID, nobody wants to hang out with me right now. So we are trying to pull this thing off completely remote, and we've not done that thus far. So hopefully it goes well. Audio, video issues, y'all just bear with us. Hopefully we can make those as minuscule as possible. But before we jump in, I just wanted to kind of preface this episode. We're going to be talking about fall food plots. I know that a lot of guys are kind of getting ready, getting geared up to start planning now, and so we're certainly excited to for that as well. So um, we're just going to pick Al's brain. The way that this works typically is we have about five, maybe six questions, and we throw them at the guest or at the topic, and we discuss those things as much as we can. And once we wrap up all five or six of those questions, then we call it a day. So, Al, does that sound good to you, man?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm a little anxious. I don't know what the questions are going to be, but we'll give it our
Yeah.
best shot.
Well,
Al
yeah,
wanted to be teed up. I said, no, that's not how we roll.
Yeah.
uh-uh. No, we never know what we're going to be asked.
That's right. Yeah, well, I'll give you an easy one. It shouldn't be one that's too difficult for you to come up with. But the first one here is, what led you to start Vitalize Seed, and what makes it different from other companies, kind of in that same industry?
Well, I personally never planned on starting a seed company. I didn't really have interest in that. I recall, so our farm is in southeastern Ohio. It's foothills of Appalachia. Your big timber country. Lowest hole in the bucket is green food sources. I mean, you got to manage timber, cut timber, those type of things. But our neighbors cut hard. We've cut hard. A lot of people. It's always people are selling timber. Very similar to probably what some of you all see, except in our landscape in Ohio and the Midwest, properties are quite a bit smaller than what you see in the Southeast. We have a 300-acre farm, which is considered pretty large, relative to a lot of our neighbors. With that being said, I mean, I wanted to do more and more and more acres of food. And I remember one spring I went and pulled a soil test and I took it up to the local co-op and I got my fertilizer bill. And to do like 5 acres of a spring food plot, it was going to be like $2,200. And this was probably 8, 9 years ago, something like that. And I just remember going, all right, there's got to be another way. So I dove fully into understanding the three parts of soil, your physical, your chemical, and then of course the biological, which gets thrown around a lot when you get into regenerative agriculture and things like that, which I can touch on later. But what I found is there were a lot of other ways to make these nutrients available through highly diverse mixes. So I started writing blogs on the QDMA forum and things like that. Just, hey, here's the Ohio Farm Tour. Here's what I'm doing. Here's some deer I'm chasing. Here's some things that I'm doing. And then I started wrapping it in. I'm a really avid gardener. So I have like 110 heirloom tomatoes I grow from seed. They're from my wife's grandpa who brought them from Italy. They're like 75-year-old passed down, and I keep it
Wow.
going. So I got like 110 plants in my garden, something like that. I keep adding a couple more. And I do that every year. So I started taking a lot of the soil health aspects and adding that to my garden as well. Um, as I did that, I had found that there was a lot of people who, when I would write these blogs, I mean, I'd buy that mix off of you. I'd buy that mix off of you. Or I just was getting inundated over, many years without really trying to market or anything, just messages on Facebook. Hey, can you help me with the soil test? Hey, I don't really understand this. And it actually got to the point where I started helping some pretty large scale row crop farmers with like, hey, what are your thoughts about, doing this or trying this? And kind of started shooting some different options. And I'm always learning from a lot of folks as well. So when an opportunity came up, my buddy Jared owns Habitat podcast, and he had no longer had anybody kind of associated with him. And we were talking, and I'm like, you really need to have an avenue to make it worthwhile to move product. You can't just mix up a little bit of seed. You have to be able to mix up enough that's going to make sense. And that's basically what we did. We took the two mixes, fine-tuned them from what I had been making on my own farm. Made them, I think, a little bit better than what I had been doing,
Mm.
and started selling them. And some of the things that I tell people what make us different. Well, number one is customer service, right? No matter how you want to sell, set it is customer service is key, and it's lacking in almost every industry. I handle phone calls and text messages 7 days a week. I'm talking to customers and helping them through things. The other one is seed quality and seed freshness. So I always tell people you got to be very careful in this market. There's a lot of great companies, but there's also anytime I see something that's too inexpensive, I start asking, is that cleaned and certified seed?
Mm.
I can't sell unclean seed. Like somebody, I get soybeans from my neighbor for free. He spills them out of his thing and he lets me scoop them up. Well, I can't sell that. That's good for you if you got a free hookup or something. I'm not saying it's bad. You got to be careful because is there mare's tail? Is there pigweed in there? Is there palmer amaranth? Like all these different things. Are they going to be inside that seed now that you got bin oats for $2, or something really low price? Really be careful on that. And then lastly, I could go on, but I won't be too long-winded, is the ratios of our mixes. So I always really pride myself on that. Our mixes are really focused on carbon and nitrogen ratios and cycling that nutrients from one planting to the next. But also they're really focused on attracting wildlife. And like our fall mix, I'm happy to tell people in an acre, you get 4.5 pounds of brassicas in there. And it's about 55% top quality grains, like winter wheat, winter rye, oats, triticale, so we don't put 90% grains and then, spill a couple purple top turnips in there and try to make it look good. We want people to realize you're getting a top quality thing. And the reason I do that is I won't sell anything I'm not going to plant on my own farm. So I want good tuber production. I also use forage quality brassicas as well as the tuber production. So not only do we use, the root buster radishes and diacon radishes and Winfred forage brassica or in purple top turnips, we also are using things like Winfred forage brassicas, right? Things that were developed for the cattle industry to be able to handle browse and then being able to continue to grow those leaves so that in those areas where guys are putting hidey hole food plots in and things like that, you're not just going to be one and done like you would be if you did a monoculture, say purple top turnips. You got a high deer density, you're done. And then we also have a bunch of really hot, top quality annual clovers. And I think Jeremy sent me a
Mhm.
couple pictures last year, big as his hand, some of the clovers. And, it'd be cheaper to use just crimson, right? But we want crimson. We want fixation balanza. We want frosty berseem. And we don't cover those up. We don't say it's Albert's special clover. Like, I want people to know the value they're getting. The fixation balanza, it took a long time for them to develop that
That's right.
quality of a clover. That I want people to understand, like, I could put on variety not stated and say Albert's, vitalized special clover, but I don't want that. I think it's more important for the niche that we service, for people to understand what they're getting. And that's what we do when we work with small growers from flower farmers. I had some people order cover crop seed from us today. They use our fall mix for their cover crops for their flower farms or orchards or things like that. Obviously, all the way up to guys who are, as nuts as me. We're planting 50, 60, 100 acres a year of food plots for deer. And, we kind of work with everybody in between.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I don't know if I've shared with Taylor and Matt how I actually came across you guys and reached out to you. Um, Matt and I have a mutual friend, Stephen Cotney, that had gotten real big into the regenerative ag stuff. And I was picking his brain. This has been several years ago. And I was actually looking at it because we bought a farm, and on the farm, part of it had been all the dirt had been pushed up, and it was a motocross track. So obviously, the the soil was terrible. A lot of clay on top where they'd built all the jumps and all that. But I was trying to plant something for improving the soil and for my cattle grazing. Just both of them. And he told me to look into a few things, and I did, and came across you guys, and I reached out to you, and that's how we got hooked up. Is it originally had nothing to do with deer. It was all about just improving some soil and providing some forage for some cows. So
That's cool. Yeah, and I think it's neat that you said something earlier about um, having different varieties and mixes and things like that, or within your mix. And that kind of leads into that second question, too, that I've got here is why is it so important to have a diversity, have a lot of different things in your mixes?
Well, I mean, it's multifaceted, right? Number one, from a soil health perspective, you want to make sure that you're balancing, um, you know, different root structures within your soil. Some plants are going to be more fibrous and more on the top, and it's going to be really um, good at cycling nutrients that are on the top and stimulating microbes, but then you're going to also want nutrients that are deep down, or roots, excuse me, that are deep down, that are scavenging nitrate and things like that and pulling that back up, right? So you hear that a lot with things like Sudan. It's a good nitrogen scavenger, or radish if it's a fall planting. You hear that often. So having that is really critical. I also think it's important. So I'll use our Nitro Boost, which is our spring summer mix, as an example of this. Is I don't want all of the food. If it's a whitetail, most of your listeners are going to be wildlife guys, so we'll focus on
mhm.
whitetails, specifically. But I don't want all of the food walking off the field. So I want species in there, just like sorghum, like Sudan, that are not overly attractive to wildlife or whitetails, in particularly from a browsability perspective, because I want those in there from a soil health perspective. Let the deer eat the cowpeas and the lab and the soybeans and things. But that way, when I go in there and no-till drill through that in the fall, or if you don't have a no-till drill, you broadcast in and mow it off, or you broadcast and spray it off, or something like that. Now you have a thatch that's able to cover that. If I plant a soybean monoculture in a lot of the whitetails range, at least in the southeast and in the central Midwest, some of the northern Midwest might not have the density that we have, like say in Ohio, and definitely not in the southeast. You plant a soybean monoculture, you better have like 50 acres, because I mean it's just not going to be able to produce um, sustainable thing to plant into. You're going to be planting into bare dirt. And what do we know about
Mhm.
bare dirt and hot temperatures from a microbial stimulation perspective, or a biological side of the soil? That's doing a lot of damage. So by having a very diverse mix, that's really aiding in multi things. One, more browsability. I have a really good friend of mine who's a great customer in Louisiana, and he's got Sudan that is probably, he plants around the first week of October. Which is probably similar to a lot of your listeners, I'd imagine, as
Mhm.
well. And he's like, I got lab in 12 to 15 foot tall Sudan. So, I mean, the biomass to be able to offer that climbing structure is also critical in a well balanced mix. And a little bit goes a long way. So, those are some of the benefits of having a multi species cover crop, both from a soil health perspective, from a weed suppression perspective, and also from a deer browsability perspective.
That's cool.
You mentioned that lab climbing. I planted a little spot there beside my shop last year. Did a big spot this year. but it was the spot that I think I sent a video of you when I was finally bush hogging it down. But there's a cedar tree in that video that you can see. And it's only about 25 foot tall, but the lab had vined all the way up to the top of that cedar tree, which was pretty dang impressive that it reached that far.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, just amazing tonnage, right? And
Mhm.
and you know, having that too, so I don't know how in depth this, but I just want to make a quick comment. So understanding carbon to nitrogen ratios is really critical. And I think it's one of the number one reasons most guys give up on um no-till in particularly. But what ends up happening is if you do like let's say just a monoculture of soybeans, and let's say you get a great stand. It's a beautiful stand of soybeans, and you go in there and you drill in your fall mix. Um, what can happen is soybeans are very low carbon to nitrogen ratio from a stem and leaf density perspective.
Mhm.
So what ends up happening is it's going to cycle very, very quickly. And if you have anything happen, drought, you know, you don't get the rain, your fall crop gets hit really hard by deer, whatever it might be, you're not leaving that soil covered.
Mhm.
In the alternate of that, which happens, I think, more frequently, is people go too heavy. So they'll plant a thing of, oh man, I love sorghum Sudan. I planted that and it looked so good that I want to do a monoculture of it. And they'll do a monoculture of it and do it at a really high rate. And then they'll try to go through there and no-till drill nitrogen loving plants like brassicas for talking purposes in the fall. And what happens is your microbes are not able to break down that sorghum Sudan fast enough. So you get what's called nutrient tie up, and your brassicas just can't simply do it unless you start pouring the nitrogen to them to break that down. It's
Mhm.
really common in the Midwest with farmers who are trying to make this conversion when they're going from corn, if they're in like a corn soybean rotation, and they're going corn, and they're struggling with why is my residue not breaking down? So you start getting into vertical tillage and all these different tools, and or in furrow applications of nitrogen. But without going down that whole rabbit hole, I think it's really critical with having that balance and a highly diverse mix. It helps with that whole idea of our system, at least, of that nutrient cycling. So you're having different plant species break down at different rates that are making different nutrients available for that next planting. So hopefully that makes sense as to
Mhm.
another benefit of highly diverse mixes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's cool. Good info. I think we lost Matt's video feed. Not sure what happened to him.
Who knows? Old Matt. I don't know if we've ever even had mine. I'm not sure what the deal is. Am I showing up on your screen?
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
showing up
Yeah,
on.
you're good.
I'm not showing up
That
on.
now Matt's completely gone.
We're down a man already, guys.
He probably
Al's
ran out of data on his phone.
no, he Al was dropping too much knowledge on him. He couldn't handle
He
all the
couldn't handle
facts.
it.
Yeah, had to had to dip out. Well, that's cool. I mean, you kind of sort of led into that to the next thing that I was going to ask you. There is, um, you get like people that are frustrated with whatever it is they're trying to plant, especially like in the southeast or in the fall, something like that, and like people want to start to give up. So that third question I've got here is just what's the first thing that people need to be mindful of when planting a fall plot? Like what's kind of step number one or something that everybody needs to stop and put the brakes on. Let's get this, let's handle this thing first and then we can figure out what we want to plant and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I think Jeremy actually touched Matt and Jeremy might have hit on this on one of your guys' last podcasts, I think, if I remember correctly. But one is sunlight. I would say that's probably one of the most common things I see people, trying to do a food plot in an area that it just doesn't have sunlight. And
Hmm.
I mean, plants, fancy term, right? But photosynthesize. I mean, they need sunlight,
Mm,
and that is one thing that I see a lot. But in general, at a high level, without taking a soil test, you are really chasing your tail because you don't know what you don't know. So when guys are, especially if you're struggling, now some guys will take a shovel and they'll stick it in the ground. They'll go, man, I know the soil's good. It's down by a river, or it holds moisture. It's got a nice rich color to it, and you can, in certain situations, get away from that. So everybody's baseline is going to be a different starting point. Every soil is slightly different. But I think that's the biggest mistake I see is guys not taking a soil test. Because if you go buy a bag of seed at a Tractor Supply. It's probably going to say, here's the seed, here's the type, and here, go do this fertilizer recommendation. Well, there's a reason why farmers don't use blanket fertilizer recommendations. And the reason is because one, it can be a big waste of money. So in the Midwest and most Midwestern soils and some of the heavy clay that you all have, sandy's going to be slightly different, but bear with me. Phosphorus is expected to move, synthetic phosphorus, at about a quarter inch a year in a soil. So if you're trying to do a no-till system, because you've watched YouTube programs or whatever it might be, you listen to podcasts and you're like, man, I love this no-till idea. But then you're sticking to putting synthetic phosphorus on. That's like a generational play. So you might be struggling to get plants to grow because you're trying to just do a broadcast no-till system and you're throwing down a whole bunch of phosphorus, even if your soil test does say you need it, and you're wasting money. You'd be much better off getting a manure type source there, even if it's a little bit more expensive or a little bit less, or you have to go with a pelletized type of thing. And you just do a little bit at a time and letting earthworms and other arthropods naturally move that down into the root system through biological movement, right, of those things happening, because that will happen. Worms, beetles, they're going to grab that and move it through the soil profile. They're going to defecate. Now you're moving the nutrients more in a natural way through that soil profile versus if you're just not taking a soil test, or you're taking a soil test, but you're not really prescribing what you need for that specific soil type and specifically to how you're planting. To me, that's where most people continue to struggle and struggle and struggle, is they're just taking blanket advice or blanket things that they've read online, and it's like they don't understand why they're struggling. And then lastly on that particular topic is every farm has a different deer density, soil fertility, etc. So I just preach, put up exclusion fences, because if you don't, one, you don't know if it failed or if it was deer browse. And guys will say, oh, I had a camera up, or I promise you, I don't know a lot. But what I do know is you will be blown away by exclusion fences every time you put them up. And it is so critical to understand what is happening here. And then you can understand, okay, they recommended for turnips, whatever, 2 pounds to the acre of turnips. Man, I planted it here and I need to do double that rate for this deer density if I want turnips to be successful, and I need to do nitrogen application or whatever it might be. If you're using our mix, you might say, oh, instead of 45 pounds to the acre, I'm going to bump up to 50, So I think that is really some of the things that people, when they're struggling, why they struggle is because of the soil test, no exclusion fence, and then of course just following, not understanding how soil nutrients move through the soil is really, really critical.
It's nice to hear you say the exclusion cages too. We preach that, or I know I do. I'm sure Matt does. And I've got a long-term client that every year we struggle with his food plots every year. And every year I put up exclusion cages, and they're lush inside the exclusion cage, but he wants to know why there's not any on the outside. And it's the same answer year in, year out. You got too many deer. And unfortunately, they like seeing deer, so they're not willing to shoot deer, which is kind of an odd deal for me, managing a piece of property where people don't really want to shoot very many deer. But it has created a problem for them.
Oh, absolutely. I tell people all the time, I said I'm going to put it on a shirt eventually so nobody steal it. But I said most properties, they either need to plant more food, shoot more deer, or on most places, both. And the problem is, when I say plant more food, obviously, yeah, we're talking food plots now, but I mean, we do heavy TSI. We're doing clear cuts. Like maybe that's your way of planting, right? From a management perspective with a chainsaw, but like, it's just so critical and so overlooked. And I can't stress it enough, the importance of an exclusion fence, and not just one. Like, I also think you can learn a lot by putting them on different fields, even within the same farm, because you'll see that, oh man, on my naturally better soil fertility fields, these species, especially in diverse mixes, man, these species really took off. And man, on my less, fertile soils, I noticed that these species were a little bit more prevalent. And they're just like little things that you'll notice and you'll really learn um, a lot
Yeah.
about seeding rates, whether you're drilling or broadcasting. It'll help you over time to fine tune, and honestly, it'll save you money because you'll fine tune. Hey, I'm even if you have to increase seeding rates, you're going to be more efficient on fuel and everything else. So it's going to be so worth it. And then what I love doing is coming up with, all right, how many does are we going to shoot this year? And you set a goal and then you analyze it again the next year and say, okay, we got to go up or down or whatever. Most time it's up still, but that's really, really, really critical.
Yeah. It's and the mixes and the things that I found, of course, like I said, I started with you guys looking at cattle, but how the tonnage that these mixes produce and how they respond to grazing pressure is pretty phenomenal. I've cut down, and you talk about saving money. I've cut down on my hay consumption for my cattle by doing intensive grazing on the carbon load stuff in the fall. By last year I was roughly 60% usage of the year before, and I'm expecting it to go down even more because we've added acres, but even more this year. We'll run the cows hard on a little small section of one of those fields, and then we'll rotate them on to the next one. And I try to give all the sections that we graze minimum 10 to 14 days rest, how we rotate them through. And man, it just lasts all year. So, throwing 40 head of, 1,000-pound animals on the field is a lot different than growing deer. But it just goes to show how resilient those plants are, and how much browsing they can take and keep
Well, and
on pumping.
I'd like to talk about that just for a brief second because sometimes people talk about, building up soils and things. And I think this example gets used a lot in the regenerative agriculture space. And I think it's a good one. But there's one key thing that I think people overlook when it comes from managing a deer or wildlife to
Mm.
cattle when it comes to trying to move nutrients in the soil. So if you take Jeremy's example, let's just say it's a 3 football fields, so 3 acres, and he's taking 40 and he's got them on the football field A and then B and then C. Well, if A has low phosphorus, but B and C are high in phosphorus, those plants are likely going to have higher phosphorus in the tissue, right? Now those cows are ingesting that phosphorus and they're moving to C and they're defecating and urinating, and then they're moving back to A once that recovery period has happened, and now they're defecating. Well, now you're moving some of those nutrients, and now those earthworms and things like that are going to be breaking down those cow pies are going to be cycling that manure right into the soil profile. So now those cows are moved. Now those plants are starting to increase some of that phosphorus and things like that. I'm just using phosphorus as an example because it's pretty well known it's an immobile nutrient. But here's where this gets tough is with wildlife. It's really hard to do that. So I always use the expression, you don't want all your nutrients walking off the field. So if you want to reduce, like I have not used an ounce of fertilizer on my farm in, I think it's 7 years now. I've played around with some foliars and things like that, and I'm not anti using fertilizer. I'm very critical about it if I'm going to use it in an application, or if I'm going to give advice about using it. I'm okay with doing it, but I just haven't needed to because the biomass I've been able to produce has been so critical. But that will not last forever if I'm mining all these nutrients and cycling all these nutrients and then everything's ate down lip high year after year after year. And yeah, deer defecate a little bit in the fields, but it's not like cows. I mean, they're a little bit and then they're gone, a little bit and then they're gone, and that's why you walk a thicket versus a food plot. You're going to count a lot more feces in a thicket than you are in a food plot, at least in my experience. So
Right.
I tend to think that that sometimes gets a little bit overlooked. That if everything's always walking off the field, you really got to manage those expectations. Even though the amount of nutrients in our soils is hard to even fathom how many pounds are there that we can make available through biology. You still want to keep that in mind, in my opinion, as to one of the reasons it works so well in regenerative ag and cattle is because of what Jeremy explained, and hopefully my example helped a little bit as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, talking about those exclusion fences, there are places here in the South where, their deer density is so high, especially I would just say even the southern half of the state of Alabama, just as just kind of a generalized area. Um, the southern half, if you don't do something to deter deer, your options are either put up some sort of an exclusion fence or plant an extremely large food plot. But that's it. If you mentioned earlier the micro plots and stuff, these little honey holes that are kind of tucked away, and you're planting little half acre stuff like that. I mean, they won't make it. They won't
It doesn't
survive. And
work.
so, it doesn't work here at least. For other parts of the country where your deer density isn't as high, then you might be able to get away with that. But I mean, down here, those are about your only choices.
And,
As far.
and some of the things I see, talked about, and it kind of gets off the food plot game somewhat, but the folks that are planting, and Al touched on it, as far as sunlight goes, the little narrow strips, through the woods that deer, meander down and eat on. That's great and wonderful if you can get some sunlight at some time during the winter in something that's either short canopied or hardwood where you get more sunlight. For us in pine timber, I mean, you can forget it. It's dark. It's dark at 12 noon in the summertime.
Yeah.
Um, so, we just don't have those options in most situations. Now, some we do, but just it's not widespread.
Sure. Matt, are you still with us?
No, Matt's gone.
He's gone
He,
again.
he
Okay.
sent me a text. His technology failed him. I'm telling
Well,
you, we're gonna have to pass the collection plate around and get him technology that works.
get him some proper stuff. That's funny. Well, moving on here. Next question, Alf, you ready?
I'm ready.
We've talked a little bit about this already. I think you could probably maybe dive into this with a little bit more detail, maybe. But question number 4: what are some of the biggest problems slash misconceptions in food plotting? I know that just kind of in your experience, not just with the vitalized seed, but just personally, I guess maybe, I know one thing that Jeremy and I have talked about a good bit is that um, people want their food plots to just look pristine. They want them to be so clean. They can't have a single, piece of weed in there anywhere. Like it's just, and it drives them crazy. That's one thing I feel like it's not a hill worth dying on. At the end of the day, you're trying to feed wildlife. You're not, it's not commercial agriculture because we're talking about fall food plots and stuff. So that's just one example. But is there anything like that you could point to and say, hey, look, you need to make this more of a priority and you need to make these 2 or 3 things a much lower priority, I guess, when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. I think in general, I've thought about this a lot just in how the industry goes. And there's a statistics term that says, you've probably heard it before, but it says, correlation does not imply causation.
That's right.
And I,
Yep.
and I think that there's oftentimes in really every industry, not just the wildlife industry, right? But there's this
That's
idea
right.
like, if you do this, a booner's going to show up,
Right.
and I think that's a really, 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 really big misconception. And listen, I love being on a tractor. My son's 3 years old. We planted the first field today. He was on the not today, excuse me. This year he was on his buddy seat, on the tractor with me. We had Tracy Lawrence radio blaring. I mean, I love it, but all the food plots in the world are not going to be the only thing that grows a big deer. If you shoot every 3-year-old deer on your farm and you got 10,000 acres of food plots, but every 3-year-old buck gets killed, you're not going to have any big deer. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many other factors that go into it. You know, you're not just going to pour a special bag of mineral or feed on the ground. And yes, somebody might do that and get a picture of a big deer, but that big deer is not there or did not get there because that special sack of dust or whatever it might be is on the ground. So I think that there is a lot of times where people will say things or do things in this industry, and in all industries, in ag, it happens too, but they will make claims or they'll say, hey, I did this and it was correlated to an increase in organic matter, or it was correlated to the, and there's not enough quantifiable evidence if you really dove into it to say what they're saying, you know, or to prove what they're saying. But it sounds good. And hey, I did this. And I've actually started a group years ago before I started Vitalize Seed called Build Better Soil. And I now resent that because there's a lot of things that are sold out there as like a soil building mix. And our term gets thrown around there, but there is no singular mix, right? Or singular action that's going to build soil, however you define build, right? Is it biological? Is it chemical? Is it the physical side? Like, what are you going to do? Or how do you want to quantify or define that? So to me, that's one of the things is like marketing plays a key in every aspect of our life, right? From politics to going to the store to buy some, marketing or advertising is going to play a key. But I just ask people, you know, it's good to question things and ask how and ask why and try to understand, because I do think that that's a big misnomer, whether it's bug in a jug or jug in a bug, whatever the saying is, to something I'm going to spray, to, you know, something I'm going to plant. It's going to fix all my problems. There's a lot more that goes into it. The other thing I'll say is just like everything, Taylor and Jeremy, you both can probably relate to this. You know, no-till is very popular right now, and I'm a huge fan of no-till. Our terrain, as I mentioned, we're in the foothills of Appalachia. So our terrain, if I was tilling it like crazy with the droughts that we've been experiencing, then getting hard rains, it would be very detrimental to any topsoil that's there. It would not be good. It's really rugged terrain. Now, I will tell you that I have customers that call me and they're like sheepishly talking, like, well, I guess I might have to till a little bit. I'm like, well, let's talk about it. Why do you want to till? Well, I don't want to use any herbicide. My wife and I, we live on the farm, you know, and the food plots behind the house. My wife doesn't want to have any herbicide. I'm like, hey, man, don't beat yourself up. Let's just not till as deep, right? Like, let's come up with a plan that's going to work for you. And that is what drives me nuts, is like, I always like to say any step towards soil conservation is a step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And people will find a topic, be it no-till, be it regenerative ag, be it conventional, and they will just dig their heels in so deeply that if somebody asks for help outside of the parameters in which they've defined as perfect, it's like, I can't help you. You know, and what I try to do is like, all right, well, let's come up with a plan that works for you. Now I have other people, myself included. I'm like, hey, I'm good with no-till, but I'm not going to roller crimp my way out of a fescue pasture. So if
Right.
you know, if I have to go in there and do a glyphosate and Liberty burn down, then I'm good with it. You know, I try to limit it. I try to reduce herbicide just from a cost perspective. I also think that there's a lot of things out there that guys will get hung up on because they heard it somewhere. Again, going back to correlation to the causation example. Oh, well, if you use herbicide, you kill all your microbes. I'm not saying that some of that might not be true. There's a ton of peer-reviewed research out there. Some shows actually CO2 increase in respiration, which means your microbes are rapidly producing, which they're letting off more CO2. I have taken personally PLFA examples on parts of my farm, which that's phospholipidic fatty acids, which is a measurement of microbial biomass in your soil profile on fields that have used herbicide. Now, not long-lasting residual herbicides, not multiple trips a year. I'm talking once, maybe every 12 months, because if I can roller crimp and let stuff grow up, I will. But let's say I've done, the biomass is off the charts. I forget the unit they use, but it's like at 5,000 units. Mine was like 6 or 7 or 8,000 units on that particular field.
Wow.
And I mean, literally off the charts of what they max out. They said if it's at 5,000, it's high. Mine's off the charts. And I actually reviewed it. We work with Ward Laboratories, and I reviewed it with one of their specialists to go over that. So again, take little bits from a very eclectic source and try to get the best plan you can. But feeding deer, that's the easy part. Talk to a
Mhm.
farmer. They want to keep deer off, and that's even when they're trying to grow corn, things that deer aren't supposed to be eating in high deer density areas where the deer are eating, the green part. They're not even cob because they're just doing so much damage in certain parts. I'm
Uh-huh.
sure in the Southeast, definitely in parts of the Midwest as well. So to me, not all conventional wisdom is accurate. We're learning more every day. There's more research being done every day. And not all new age stuff is perfect either. And there's
That's right.
somewhere, like everything, there's a truth that lies in the middle. And I think that's where um, I get the most joy is helping customers when they call me or text me and we walk through and, hey, here's what I would prescribe for your field based on the information you've given me. Um, that's where it really makes a difference. Don't forget, a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, I was planting these with didn't have a company. I was just doing these mixing myself, and guys would tear into me because they said you can't plant grains and brassicas together. Can't do it.
Huh.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm doing it and
Yeah.
having success. So there's a lot of information out there, and I think sometimes people dig their heels in, but we're always learning and adjusting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things there that just kind of made me think too. With with my degree, like we were they pride themselves at Jacksonville. I have a psych degree, and their thing is if you graduate from this program, you're going to know how to do and conduct and publish research. Like you will have to figure this out, or you will not graduate. It's just like their kind of badge of honor, I guess. And so um, talking about causation versus correlation and stuff, and you get into some of that, and it's like even now, like you talk about marketing playing an element in every industry, like in the health industry, um, the carnivore diet is what has taken off. Carbs are bad. Carbs are bad. All I can see, if you eat a loaf of bread, then you know what I mean. You're shooting yourself in the foot. It's terrible for your body. It's like, look, I'm not saying that you should overindulge, but like your body needs carbohydrates. Let's talk about which one of these things has a causation type relationship, or which one maybe has a correlation to, so but it's funny how it does affect every industry. But um
Absolutely.
and the other
Absolutely.
thing too is that the longer that we have done this podcast, and even just like Jeremy and Matt, and then other people that we've been able to have on as guests, in terms of management, in terms of, you know, a year-round management plan for wildlife, I think what I'm starting to finally start to realize is that very seldom, if ever, is there a just super quick, easy fix to whatever it is that you have going on. Well, I'm just not
No.
seeing the deer that I want to see, or I'm not holding the amount of turkeys that I want to hold, or whatever it is, whatever your problem seems to be, there's not just a super quick solution to that most of the time. It requires like, okay, do you have your harvest restrictions in order? Do you have your habitat in order? Do you have, you know what I mean? It's just like now you check off all of these boxes, and then you start to see positive things happen over time. And like you said, look, some of these guys will go plant a food plot or 10,000 acres of food plots or whatever, and get a trail cam picture of a monster buck. Well, like there's nothing that guaranteed that was ever going to happen. But all you can do is just make sure that you're checking their boxes and not stacking the odds, but giving yourself whatever advantage you can get, and give those animals whatever advantage they can have to reach their maturity, I guess. So, um, it kind of is an all encompassing type thing rather than just a one, one piece of the puzzle type thing, I guess.
Well, I
And
think,
he,
yeah. I mean, Jeremy, I'm sure in your experiences you could shed some light on this, but I mean, in mine, I think one of the biggest issues I see with guys, I got a lot of friends. Oh man, I'd love to buy a farm someday or whatever, Hey, pick my brain. Hey, what's it been like? We started with just a small chunk of ground. Over years, we've added a little bit more and a little bit more. There's certain things you say, put up gates, post the property, those general things. Put some cameras for deer and some cameras for troublemakers. But then I always tell them, I go, all of that to say, don't always assume that the neighbors are the bad guy. because I think it's so easy. You read on forums or Facebook, oh, the neighbors, they shoot all my deer, or they shoot this, and in my experience, we've had fantastic rapport, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, well, I was managing 1,000 acres or 300 acres or 50. And now, oh, well, now we got 200 acres of guys on the same page. And now we got 1,000 and two. Before you know it, you're like, oh, we got 10,000 acres on the same page,
Yeah.
and depending on where you're at in the country, that's going to all be relative scale. But I think that's something that I found is like, oh man, it seemed like everybody had such negative things to say about their neighbors. And I'm just like, pretty happy like guy. I consider myself a really nice guy. I just like talking to people, and I'd meet a guy on the road or whatever, pull the truck over and start, hey, how's it going? Get his cell phone number. We start texting, sharing deer pictures, and hey, I found this shed. And before you know it, it's like, man, we're all on the same page and we're all
Yeah.
having fun. And you aren't this supposedly, evil, evil neighbor. Like you're staying on your side of the line. I'm staying on mine. We're having fun. Like, so I think that would be another big thing that I think people will do from a management perspective is don't assume your neighbors are bad. Cause in my experience, I just have not seen that, be it a permission piece I'm hunting or managing to my own kind of life work that I call the farm.
When it comes to neighbors, I live by the motto, trust but verify. You're gonna trust them at their word, but then verify, through the years. Because if you've listened to us, you heard me complain about one of our neighbors. Um, it's just the fact of the matter. They do things differently, and hey, it's their they don't own it. It's their hunting lease. They can do whatever they want. It just doesn't help us. Um, and it sounds selfish the way it's coming out because everything we do helps them, but nothing, literally nothing they do really has a positive impact on us. Um, but honestly, I believe that is a little bit different because of culture, hunting culture in the past, in the Midwest and in the Northeast, where cooperatives were much more, I guess, common. And I remember when QDMA got started years ago, I can't remember who was over that. It was probably Kip that was working on, all forming co-ops throughout the country. And it worked well there. And it traditionally has not worked in the South. Um, Part of it is very stubborn folks over property rights aspects. And look, I'm that way. And two, uh, just doggone, just downright stubborn as I'm gonna do whatever I want to do, but that's fine. I do though when I am researching properties for customers for purchase, I do deep dives on the neighbors. We have let some tracks go that look great on the outside. The landowner would have loved the property, or the future landowner would have loved the property, but they didn't want to fight what we found out was going to be poor neighbors when it come to hunting aspect. So I do recommend people trust but verify for sure.
It's a great point.
And I'm chasing rabbits here like we often do. But you mentioned treating each field differently and even portions of each field differently. One thing I want to throw out there from a consultant side of things, when we're out working on landowners' farms and we're spending all this time planting fields, trying to take advantage of all the information that we have at our fingertips, which is soil samples, having somebody read those soil samples and help us. I've called you on several, just scratching my head on them and just say, hey, walk me through this. And you send them an invoice and like, why in the crap did it cost this much to plant, these fields? And like, well, it's not just a simple one pass or one mix does all. You've got to treat everything differently, and it takes a lot of time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys who I've learned a ton from, he's in Southeast Georgia, I believe. And he's an ag consultant and he works in Alabama too. I don't know if you guys know Caleb Traw.
Caleb. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've talked to Caleb for years. I actually need to give him a call at some point because he was just a wealth of knowledge and I would say a mentor to me when I would have questions and dive into things, especially on the chemical side of
Yeah.
the soil. He was really, really good. And he was inspiring to talk to, and he was one who really got me into Ag PhD radio. They do a nice job
Yeah.
there, but understanding, they recommend now this is at the ag level. So does a food plotter need to get this serious? Maybe not, but they're recommending 1 acre grid soil tests.
Uh-huh.
So, you take a 3 acre field and you got hardwoods on one side and pines on the other, let's say, well, those soils are probably going to be a little bit different. So you don't want
Absolutely.
to lime this one like crazy on this side. Well, wait, maybe that pH is okay, and you're not liming the other side, or vice versa, right? So those are things too that can really set you apart. Is if you are feeling like, hey, I'm getting some traction, things are looking good. Start breaking down those soil tests. I actually, from Caleb, taught me this. I took my phone, I got OnX, and I use GPS coordinates. So my goal every year when I'm taking samples is that I hope that probe, it's going down 6 inches, and I hope that it's going to the same hole almost that it went
Yeah.
in the year before. And that, I have my probe marked with a Sharpie. So every time I step on that, I'm going 6 inches down, 6 inches down, 6 inches down. Because again, you take a shovel and throw it into a bucket and mix it up, and you have this much organic matter, which typically is in top of your topsoil, right? In this shovelful. And then the next shovelful, you just take it all from the bottom and you went 10 inches deep because you're talking to your buddy or answering your phone. That's when you get a lot of really big inconsistencies. And that's where you'll see organic matter readings like this, up and down and down and up, and not to mention fertility recommendations. So, kind of got off on a tangent there, but I wanted to add that because I do think that's really, really critical for people who are looking to fine tune their program. Breaking down that section for soil sampling can be huge.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, switch gears a little bit with this last question that I've got here is obviously other than the time frame, um, talk about kind of what you're planning, I guess would be the difference here. But what's the biggest difference in your eyes between fall plots versus spring plots? I know obviously you're planting one of those in the spring, one in the fall, but apart from that, what are what are you changing up? What are you planting in the spring that you're not planting in the fall, vice versa?
Yeah, so that's a great question. What I look at it as is for hunters is your spring plot is your cover crop for your cash crop. And the reason I say that is because, well, as hunters, most of the time we want to get the maximum yield, attractiveness, etc., out of that fall plot. And what you can do is plant a nitro boost as our spring summer mix in the summer to feed that soil. So that is high nitro in legumes. So it's got beans and peas and cowpeas and all these type of things. Lab, American joint vetch. It also has some non-leguminous species like Sudan and sorghum and spring barley and a little bit of rape and things like that are going to scavenge some nitrogen. In general, most of the whitetails range, fall planted crops really like nitrogen. Your grains, your brassicas, clovers, a little bit at planting they can handle if you're using synthetic fertilizer. But then after that, if you have the right bacteria in there, they should start fixing their own nitrogen. But in general, there peas also are a legume that are in that fall mix. So to me, that's why I'm focused on planting a spring mix for my fall, right? Now, the other benefit, of course, is that you do have good quality forage, soybeans in there and things like that, clovers in that spring mix that are going to feed your wildlife all spring and summer too. So that's another really good benefit, obviously. Now, if you are in a no-till program, some guys are still in, they want to make it like a green manure where they're tilling it under. But if you are in a no-till program and you have this big amount of biomass, like you saw in the videos we shared of Jeremy bush hogging or some of the ones on our website where I'm drilling through it just a week or two ago, you can see how that mat is going to suppress weeds going into the fall. So that's another big benefit of kind of having that spring to summer or excuse me, spring, summer to fall rotation, if you will. Now, if you are a gardener or, an orchard or you're managing, then it's a little bit different. Typically, people are using a fall cover crop like our carbon load, and then they're following that with their cash crop. We do have some, depending on what they're growing. If they're growing, let's say, garlic, most people are going to be planting garlic late fall. They're actually using our summer cover crop, Nitro Boost, in that bed all summer, terminate, and then planting their fall crop like garlic for talking purposes, or other species that they won't harvest right away. More in like on the small scale farming side. But those are some of those benefits. I mean, in the fall, to answer your last question, what are you planting? Again, typically your grains, your brassicas, you're going to have high quality clovers, and then at least in our mix, and then you're going to have things like peas, hairy vetch, as well. So some of those again are really, really, really good species for as far as deer attractiveness. All of them are going to overwinter in your area. I would say 98% of them overwinter in even up to Minnesota. There's a couple species that might not, some of your brassicas and things, but those are typically what you're going to be planting in that fall mix.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I mean, I know obviously I think of it in terms of, like you said, hey, I'm trying to feed my wildlife more so in the spring and summer months, making sure that they're getting the maximum amount of nutrients out of that plot. Whereas in the fall, yes, they may be in the same physical location, but I mean, if I'm planting a fall plot, it's with the intention of hopefully harvesting a deer off this place too. You know what I mean? It's like I'm trying to access that in a way that that doesn't bump deer every time I get in there. And that way I can slip in, slip out easily and be undisturbed. But at the same time, I want it to be attractive. I want it to be something that wildlife, that deer find attractive and are going to come out there and check out, and I have a chance to harvest animals off of it. That's not necessarily the case in the spring. I mean, I guess you could make the case for turkeys, but apart from that, they're not, that's in my eyes, I guess the biggest difference for me. But
Well,
um,
and Taylor, I learn from customers all the time, because I'll tell you, the way my mind works is it's just very pragmatic. Your carbon and nitrogen ratios, and we're doing one after the next, after the next, after next, and we're building soil, and we're going to attract deer, and we're going to fill tags, and it's going to be great. Or, my tomato garden is going to be sweet because I'm building the soil up using, different biology and stuff like. But what I found is how these customers who are, I mean, I love hunting deer. I probably dilute how much I like it a lot when I'm on podcasts like this. But I love hunting deer. But the strategy that some of these guys will come up with and how they're using these mixes, I'm like, man, I never even thought about that. Like, I'll
yeah,
have guys say, like, they'll plant a 5 acre field, say, and that Nitro Boost will be like Jeremy 150 horsepower tractor, and it's up to the cab on it. Well, they're going like, well, I'm leaving the back of it. And they'll just broadcast the carbon load in there. So there's a mixture of food, but they'll leave it tall, and then they'll only plant the front acre where they're actually going to go in and till it under, or drill through it, or do an herbicide burn down, or whatever planting method they have. And I'm like, oh man. Or, I've had other guys say, I'm going to mow strips through it, and then I'm going to plant those strips, and then I'm going to leave, one standing strip tall by where my blind is, so I can just go pop up in that blind, and then I'm overlooking these strips. And like,
absolutely.
I've had all sorts of different things. And even
That's
in the spring, or yeah, in the spring when carbon load comes back, I've had guys go, man, I planted, we have some customers who are doing lots of acreage, and they'll go, I'm going to leave 5 acres of it just for fawning cover, because you'll have those annual clovers, I mean, waist high sometimes, and then
yep.
you'll have the heads from the rye and the triticale and stuff, and they're falling over, and turkeys are eating those, and they're like, man, I just want to leave it for fawning cover. And then they'll send me a picture of, does and fawns, and they're like crazy. I'm like, again, I hadn't even considered that really. I had
Yeah.
done that a few years ago. One time in the fall, just because I ran out of time. It's a mechanical breakdown, so I just broadcasted my spring summer mix into it and just left it. But I mean, some of the ways that guys come cutting trails through it and then leaving some and planting some, I mean, it's really cool. And I always love learning from how customers are implementing things. So much so, I just bought one of those blowers. Have you ever seen them they go on like a leaf blower?
Got one.
I just
Yeah.
bought one because one of my customers, he plants like a ton of Vitalize every year.
Yep.
And he also plants, he's in Iowa. So he plants like 80, 40 or 80 acres of soybeans. I can't remember. But then he loves the carbon load so much. He has his son sit in the passenger and they just blow that carbon load as he drives real slow down. He just blow it into all those soybeans.
Yep.
And he was like, I'm like, do you like that? Because again, our terrain's, rough. So there's spots I'm like, I'm not drilling that. It's just not worth the time. Well, now with that thing, I go right down on the four-wheeler. I'm just, but I burned something down with a herbicide. I just
Yeah.
blow the seed right into it. But again, I always learning from people because that's really what makes it cool. There's just so many ways to skin the proverbial cat, if you will.
Yeah, it's funny some of the things that you see get popularized, for one person doing it or another, and now people are seeing it on social media, so things get popular really quick. Um, it's funny you mentioned the planting into the nitro boost like that. We've got a client that last year, let me back up, 2 years ago, he bought the property. They saw a ton of bucks in an old field setting. It had gotten grown up, saplings, but was great for deer cover and deer food. But he wanted a large food plot. I mean, it's what he wanted to do. And prior to us starting to work for him, he had cleared the whole thing. I mean, from one end to the other, it was 9 acres or so. Uh, and so he cleared the whole thing down to the dirt. And told him, I said, well, we'll get it planted. Uh, didn't know what kind of weed competition I was going to have, so we planted just straight Roundup Ready Eagle soybeans. And man, the deer used it. They looked great, but when it came deer season time, deer did not want to come out in that field. I mean, they just didn't want to do it. Uh, so this year we we planted carbon load in the whole field, and we're going to go back, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I mean, we planted it in front of the blind, so it's got cover, and we're going to knock out about an acre and a half or 2 acres of strips in it just to plant the carbon load. Uh, so I've been doing that for a long time. I tell people it wasn't my idea. I started working for a guy that's not even in the seed industry anymore, but was heavily involved 25 years ago. A guy named Brian Shepard that used to work with Tecumate so much. And Eagle Seed had just kind of came out then. And we were planting that, and we were on a field, and he just had a tractor with a whirlybird spreader. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he just went down through that thing about the time the leaves were changing color, starting to yellow on the soybeans. He just spread grains and clover. It was some type of Tecumate mix back then that he was spreading in there, and just walked away after that. And after you had the leaf cast on those soybeans, you had a layer of soybeans still standing for that ultra cold that we rarely ever got in South Georgia. And you got the layer of green, down there underneath. Did it look like a golf course? Absolutely not. But it fed the wildlife and did great. And that's a lot less passes with a piece of equipment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's cool, man. That's good stuff. Jeremy, I couldn't remember if you had any other questions for Al before we let him get out of here.
Oh man, I've got 100. But
Yeah, I
we
know.
don't have time to get all of them, so we'll save them for the next time. I really would like Al to come back with us and dive deep a little more into the soil health side, and then also a little bit of the seed industry side. Um, I've got background in the seed industry, so I know it and can talk it, but. Uh, One thing that I find interesting that has become kind of popularized to be talked about on social media, they're talking about live seed percentages in your bags and whether or not you're actually getting enough to plant the acreage and the whole nine. Uh, so I've always thought that was interesting. Different manufacturers are different. So you've kind of got to pay attention to that. And it's like you said, it's all marketing, but there's a lot of things I think that we could touch on that would interest the public.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's a very diffuse industry, and there's a lot of players in there, and like I said earlier, there's a lot of great companies, really respectable companies, and just like in any industry, there's some that are just trying to drive profits, and
Yeah.
I think that, but for the soil biology side, I mean, I would love to talk about some of the testing that we're doing, total nutrient digest and tissue testing and PLFA testing, and how that correlates not just to food plots, but how does that correlate to if you're trying to grow a garden, or I know in some of your podcasts you talk about your sweet corn patch,
Yeah.
how can you use that? What are some things that we should be considering maybe, based on what are the soil tests saying, and where do you start once you get a soil test? Should you look at base saturation? Should you look at pH? And I think those are all things, in my opinion, that can be really helpful in the long term to help somebody grow a really good quality food plot or garden or orchard or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to trying a few more things, and we can talk about it later. But doing all this seeding and fertilizing and spraying with drones has it's changed the food plot game for us as a consultant. We're able to do some things that normally we had to haul a lot of heavy equipment to do, and now that has really changed the game. And I'm interested to see how that evolves the next 3 to 5 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Al, before you get out of here, man, I was going to give you a chance just to maybe tell our listeners. I mean, we talk about you guys a lot, in our social stuff and our podcast and that sort of thing. But is there anything that you guys have on the horizon? I know you said you're doing some testing and stuff, but in terms of product or anything you got coming up that maybe you want people to know about?
Yeah, so I mean, we keep it pretty simple. I mean, we're always listening to our customers. This past year, about a year and a half ago, I would say, we started to develop a clover mix. I have some logging roads that I had done some clear cuts, and I didn't want to just leave them bare. So I said, well, let's come up with a clover mix. Again, we try to do everything a little bit different. So, in our clover mix, um, some of the clovers we get, they do have a little bit of a coating on them. But again, they're going to say, well, it's going to help with the inoculation, so you don't have to inoculate it and things like that. But we also increase seeding rate a little bit there. So you get in an acre's bag of that, you get 18 pounds of clover from us, which can cover up to 2, maybe even 3 acres, depending on if it's an existing plant. We also pair that with a black oat. The reason is if you want to establish a really good long-term perennial clover plot, in all my experiences, using a nurse crop is really critical. Black oats are nice because they'll do very well in the south. They also do very well in the north. They're pretty cold hardy. So they work very, very well as a nurse crop. We also added chicory to that mix, and we have a nice mix of a couple annuals and perennials like medium red and some Ladinos. So that's a new product for us. Again, we did that because you have the annuals that help suppress weeds like that nurse crop of oats. And then after year 2, you can go ahead and just bush hog that in. You're left with just your standard clovers. Some of the clovers might reseed themselves, which isn't a big deal or an issue. So that's our newest product that we came out with as far as seed goes. And then the rest of our products are really kind of natural amendments. So, we have a fish fertilizer plus humics. So, there's a lot of fish fertilizers on the market. I've never seen one that has humic acid mixed in with it. But why is that important? Well, from a nutrient retention perspective, from a growth hormone plant perspective, you get really, really good results. That's all I use in my garden, is spraying that on. I had a little bit of a magnesium deficiency on a couple plants that I did use a little bit of Epsom salt diluted this year. So I do want to be totally honest, but that's like 90% of what I use. We have our vitalized micros. Again, a lot of soil tests we look at are low in micronutrients. What do we do differently, though? We also see that calcium and sulfur are low. So we add gypsum to those micronutrients, and we also have a humics base to that. So it's a little bit dusty, but we tell guys a lot, if you're going to put lime down, pelletized lime on a field or something like that, adding 25 pounds to the acre of micronutrients, if your soil test says you need it, you might as well add a little bit. That's kind of our take on that. And you're going across the field anyways. I cut it right in with the lime and get that down on the field. And then the two other products we have, if you buy our product, you've probably seen it. It comes inside the bag. It's called Seed Armor Plus. It's one of the things that we think we offer that nobody else is offering. That's a proprietary blend of humics. Again, it's fine powder, but also all of your rhizobium to make sure that the clovers and other legumes that are in that mix are going to have that right bacteria around that seed. And then we also do that in our spring mix of soybeans and vetch. So that's actually a broad spectrum. So it covers every legume. A lot of times, if you go to buy a rhizobium bacteria, it'll say pea,
Yeah.
bean. This is all of them as one mixed together with a humics base. We give you that for free. That's called Seed Armor Plus. That's inside every bag of seed that you buy from us. But we have a lot of people who really like it. So they'll buy it for their soybeans, or I mean, I've had guys put it on corn because they just are like, I saw a really good germination response. I really want to use it. That's most likely the humics more so than the bacteria. But that is a benefit there. We also offer a product called Seed Feed, which that's actually a fertility product. It's just a little tiny bit of powder, NPK, calcium humics. You put it right on your seed, and it's just like, Jeremy, I'm sure you're familiar with in-furrow treatments in
Oh yeah.
agriculture. That's basically what this is. It's a seed treatment that when you're running that drill or you're running the whirlybird spreader, so that that little bit of N, P, and K, as we talked about, P is very immobile in the soil. Now you have that P right around that young seedling, and it's just a little bit so that when you get those rains, that seed cracks open, it's starting to germinate, and it has that little bit of fertility to get it off to a good start. You can check our YouTube channel out. We've done a lot of controlled testing on that. The increase in available nutrients in the tissue and in the soil on where we use it versus where we didn't was like a 20% increase compared to the controls. So it's,
Wow.
it's a little bit of powder, but it
Goes a
has
long way.
it acts as a catalyst basically to jumpstart the biology by getting those young seedlings off to a good start. And I think it's $25, covers 50 plus pounds of seed. So it's not like it's a big investment. I throw it in every time I'm planting. I just put it on the seed in the drill, mix it up.
Right.
That's
So
awesome,
those are
man.
some of the new things for us. I mean, as far as new products go, I don't know. I mean, you all tell us. I mean, we're always looking to develop new things, but we also want to always make sure that our customer service is top notch. And I think one of the things that can get lost on you is if you add too many products too quickly and you try to be all things to all people, you can't really do it right for everybody. And I much rather grow naturally and slowly and know my products inside and out and be able to talk to them with the grower that calls me and specifically help them that way than try to offer 1,700 different blends. So we're really kind of slowly adding after we've trialed some things. So I promise you, I'm always trialing things, but right now we're just kind of slowly maybe adding one or two things a year, depending on, how the results show.
Yeah.
Sure. That's good though. I mean, to kind of stay in your niche and do what you know is you know what I mean? That's I don't know if you watch Parks and Rec or not, but that's one of my favorite Ron Swanson lines is never half-ass two things, just whole-ass one thing.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a whole lot to be said about that. So, stay in your lane and do what you do well. People appreciate that, and not try to offer 5 million different products too. So, um, and I guess if people want to get more information about Vitalize, and they can visit the website vitalizeseed.com. That the
Yeah,
best way.
vitalizeseed.com, contact us page. My phone number's on there. You can call, text that number anytime. My email's on there. Vitalize Seed on Facebook. I mean, on, oh geez, Instagram, TikTok. I mean, we're pretty much, I think, on all, I don't know. Taylor, you
Everywhere.
probably know better than me. I'm probably missing some of the newer stuff, but I think we're on all the ones at least that are popular now. So if you have any questions, call, text, email anytime. We sure do appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you guys, and to work with you guys is truly an honor, and to talk to your listeners is awesome. So thank you guys very much for having us
Oh
on.
man, we certainly appreciate you taking the time, and we appreciate you just, believing in us. And we kind of had an idea, but of course, we thought it was good, but that's usually how ideas work. I have a friend of mine that says, I've never had a bad idea until I told somebody else about it. You know what I mean? So we thought it was
Yeah.
a great idea. That turns out, we had a handful of people who said, yeah, I can get on board with that. I think that's something that could work. And so we're thankful to work with you guys too, because uh,
Absolutely.
And and we appreciate you just kind of sharing our stuff too,
Oh, absolutely.
more than the monetary side of things, but just being able to take some of our content and go, hey guys, check this out. This is good stuff or whatever. We appreciate that too. So
Well, it's
uh,
so critical. I always tell people there's a lot of competition, in this industry and stuff, and it can get ugly sometimes. But I always tell, I go, people listen to more than one podcast. People might plant Vitalize, and then you're like Jeremy, you're like, man, I'm planting a ton of Vitalize, but then I'm planting, Eagle Beat. Like I never, of course, I want people to plant Vitalize. Give us a call, give us a chance, try our products. But I'm like, well, why didn't you plant that other field in Vitalize? It's like what I listen to 38 different podcasts. Half of them I'm like 10 minutes in on all of them. I gotta keep going back and forth. But like I'm like share information and work together and I think that's what's like should be the beauty of being, conservationists and hunters is working together and enjoying each other's company and information. So that's my look on it and why I love when you guys share information and tag me. I'm always more than happy as long as Instagram isn't fighting me on it to try to share it and you know keep up the great work, guys, because I really enjoy the podcast and enjoy working with you.
awesome.
Hey, we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Guys, make sure you check out Vitalize Seed whenever you get a chance and just kind of read about what they're doing. I do think they have a little bit different approach, a little bit different way of doing things than what you're seeing from a lot of other companies in that industry. So check them out and reach out to them if you're interested in maybe doing some planting
Abs-
this fall for your fall food plots.
Absolutely, because their footprint is growing here in the South,
That's right, man. We're
growing
doing
every
what we
day.
can. We're trying. That's right. Well, Al, thanks so much for hanging out, man. And hopefully we will be able to share some photos and videos of some stuff we're going to be planting here soon.
That
Absolutely.
sounds great, guys. Hey, fingers crossed for good rains for us all.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. Awesome, man. Well, we appreciate it. We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks, Al.
All right, you guys take care.